Let me set the scene. It's a cold and snowy winter night, or let's at least pretend it is because it only rains around here once every 4 months give or take, but for the sake of the story, let's pretend that it is snowing to make it more dramatic for all of you. Now on this particular night I was testing out a new video player because a 14er told me that VLC was trash and that I should be crucified for having ever used it. Of course my only way of testing out how it actually looked was to open my folder of completely legally acquired anime. So I clicked on a random file and was greeted by a scene from an anime that left a much heavier impact on me than I'd ever anticipated. A scene that seemed so normal yet possessed an atmosphere that I couldn't completely comprehend at the time. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce all of you to the beginning of an anime simply titled... Oh, and also here's that clip.
いや、その時思った風にやってるんだけど、それじゃダメ。行こう。
Now and then here and there starts off as your run-of-the-mill isekai, except it kind of doesn't? Yeah, you can mark off all the standard tropes if you really wanted to, but the way they're handled is so vastly different compared to other isekai that it stands out when you weigh them against one another. I can count on one hand the number of anime that aren't afraid to let scenes breathe rather than trying to cram as much information into their first episode as possible. You've probably heard this a million times before, but the saying less is more is the best way I can describe scenes like this. Our main protagonist Shu lives a relatively ordinary life and definitely leans more towards the spontaneous and lively type to say the least. Like, this kid must have a few screws loose to be willing to climb to the top of an abandoned smokestack using a ladder that already looks like it stepped 1 foot into the grave, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Shuzo Matsutani starts off as your almost stereotypical protagonist coming from a normal family background and living out an average school life where he possesses a great passion for kendo even if he's still having a little trouble fully grasping what he's supposed to be doing. After losing his match, he thinks it would be a wonderful idea to seek refuge at the peak of a deserted smokestack where he meets a strange girl who he attempts to befriend even with her bland and uninterested responses. They then spend 5 minutes admiring one of the best sunsets I honestly think I've ever seen in an anime. Like, holy shit, dude. The background artist of the show is actually amazing. I need to give this guy a big kiss. Anyway, they're suddenly interrupted by giant snakes, and after some randomly impressive Sakuga, Shu classically gets isekai'd into the world of his dreams. But if you read the title, I think it's pretty evident that is definitely not what happens. When someone hears that something is dark, they usually interpret it in one of two ways. One way would be the grotesque and natural implications of what you associate horror with being, while the other delves far more into the psychological aspects of it. Now with that knowledge in mind, let's consider that this anime came out in the 90s. I think you can see where I'm going with this. Yes, the wonderful world of the 90s where Japan wasn't afraid to take risks and made controversial decisions to say the least. A time before we had 20 isekais per season and where the word isekai itself was still uncharted territory. Let's just say this anime being an introduction to the world of isekai isn't a surprise to me whatsoever, and the amount of care that went into it truly shows on just the first episode alone. Like, this scene of him falling has no right to look this good, and I'm also not gonna question how he didn't break his arm from this, but who cares. Anyway, the only thing I knew about this anime when I went in blind was hearing that it was dark, and personally I consider myself fairly experienced in the field of gloomy anime, but there is virtually nothing that compares to some of the acts that I had to witness in just the first 3 episodes of this show alone. Now and then here and there pulls no punches in making you feel the despair that these characters go through. The scene that you're currently witnessing lasts a full 80 seconds and does absolutely everything in its power to make you regret thinking it was a good idea to watch this series. This placed me in an interesting dilemma because I kept asking myself why I found this so much more difficult to sit through compared to similar anime that forced their characters into the exact same situations. After a lot of thinking, there was only one explanation I could come up with. This anime truly wants you to feel like complete shit. Now to better explain what I mean by this, we need to take a closer look at its competitors, which use violence and hopelessness as a vessel to carry you towards their ulterior motives. Shield Hero uses it as a means to further its revenge plot, Goblin Slayer uses it because Edge is cool I guess, and Redo of a Healer uses it to make you horny? Now and then here and there on the other hand basically has none of these and uses despair for the sheer purpose of despair itself. Unlike virtually every other isekai, the main goal for the characters in this anime is to get the out as fast as possible because this is one of the worst places you can feasibly be subjected to. Imagine a world where the only union that still possessed any semblance of power was a totalitarian dictatorship that harbored complete control over the rest of human existence. A world starved of water where the only source is a single girl who doesn't want to be enslaved for the rest of her long-lasting life, and also a prison where you have no chance of escape as your only surroundings are a vanquished desert with no end in sight. This feeling is only further established by the gloom and foreboding tone of the songs within the soundtrack of the series. I truly do believe that this is one of the most underrated soundtracks out there due to its variety of tracks found within these 17 songs. To say that these songs stick with you would be a big understatement considering that this is the composer that also did the soundtracks for shows such as... However, I'd be doing this anime's writing a disservice by not talking about the main protagonist, Shu. Ignore how cheesy this sounds, but even when he's surrounded by hopelessness, he's still the single guiding light even with his numerous flaws. When I say this, I mean it in the best way possible, but his levels of courage and motivation basically make him anime Jesus. In a way though, this is also his biggest flaw. The hope that Shu gives others only for it to be instantly roped away and grounds you back into reality that things will only get worse. On numerous occasions, Shu is called out for his empty promises, knowing that he isn't powerful enough to decide anyone's fate. In spite of this, I think it's good that he has any courage instead of none, considering that everyone around him already gave up. I think one of the biggest benefits of Now and Then Here and There is it doesn't really treat itself like it's an isekai. It hyper-focused itself onto the narrative it aimed to craft and glued itself to it. This is actually something I find a lot of seasonals struggling with, either due to the lack of direction or the fact that it tries appealing to as wide a demographic as possible. Basically, what I'm trying to say is Japan, stop making isekais.